Thanksgiving, talk about messes and failures and imperfect people and how do we navigate through that. So we're doing a series in the book of Daniel called No Compromise, and we're jumping in. We're just starting out this series, and I'm pretty excited about it. Tonight we're going to talk about a little bit about fails. If you ever set out to do something and it kind of like failed on you, I have to apologize tonight if my upper lip starts bleeding all over the place. Just kind of give me a little wave or something like that. I was shaving. I was trying to get really close and went the other way, and because I have such huge lips, Erbele lips, that's what I got, you know. It got in the way, and I actually shaved part of my lip off tonight. Started bleeding, and it's all over the place. So I think I'm doing okay. I think we're good. We'll get through it. That's a fail. We have engineers in the world that they engineer buildings and structures because what they do, they try to plan out ahead of time so that the buildings don't fail. This roof doesn't cave in, especially when there's snow and load. And my buddy is an engineer, a structural engineer, and that's what he does. And he has a company where he tries to calculate the risks, and he prepares the builders beforehand for all the things that might come at them. And so it's amazing. If we didn't have engineers, it'd be a pretty dangerous place. And I don't know if you've ever traveled to other countries. You see their engineering feats are pretty scary, right? But occasionally, these engineers maybe have not thought things through as like they should. I've got a few examples of. Here's one engineer that designed something that was kind of a failure. Designed a staircase that pretty much didn't go anywhere. I'm not sure what we do with that. Here's another one the engineer had. Yeah, there was a pole right in the middle of the driveway. Not quite sure how you back out of that yet, but that wasn't very good engineering. They didn't think ahead on that. The next one, here we go. Don't know a lot about sinks and electricity, and that doesn't seem to work right there, but who knows? Somebody designed that. Here's another one. They were putting a handicapped ramp there. Not quite to the top. They were a little bit off, like 3 steps. So somebody could roll up there, and then you'd have to help them up the rest of the way, but that's a fail right there as far as I'm concerned in terms of an engineering feat. Let's look at this one here. Oh, yeah. Somebody put a garage on the 2nd story. I'm not sure if they have an airplane or a helicopter that comes in there, but there's absolutely no way you're going to drive a car in there. And this is one of my favorites. Somebody didn't quite get that window straight. And then finally, this engineering feat of marvel right there, where they built a bridge going 2 different directions. They met in the middle, and they were a little bit off. And I love the picture because all the engineers are standing on the edge just scratching their head. How is this even possible? All right? Fails, all right? See, you know what? Before you build, you have to think, you have to plan, except some of you Germans don't do that. I know that there's some things that we just kind of go for it. But in today's world and the complications of weight load and it's all calculations that you have to think before you build. You have to plan. If you wing it, you'll probably fail. Most likely these guys were winging a lot of it, and they failed. And so before you build, before you plan your life, you have to sort of determine things ahead of time, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Trying to plan out before you live even your life, before things come at you. You need to have a plan, a purpose. Last week I talked about God being active and not reactive. A lot of times we put God in this box where we think that He is reacting and He's shocked by all the things that are going on. And so when something bad happens, we kind of react like it just takes God, like God's up there going, what am I going to do now? And we're taking Him off guard because of how we're living life and how we're perceiving life, and we think that God is reacting to all the things that happen. But you have to understand that God is active, and He has a plan and a purpose and a process, and He is very much in control. And in fact, we are reactive. We react to all these things that are coming. And so if you wing it, if you live life moment to moment, that's what we're going to talk about it tonight. If you live in the moment and you're just going to kind of let life happen instead of having a plan to calculate, you will most likely fail life. The things that come at you. You need to calculate it, to be determined beforehand. Daniel and his friends, the success of Daniel and these 3 friends that we're going to be looking at for a few chapters here, their success was dependent upon the decisions that they made beforehand, before they were in captivity. They made decisions, all right, beforehand. Yesterday, took my kids and Andrew Erbele to go snowboarding. It was the earliest opening in the history of Huff Hills. They opened yesterday, the skier. So we went snowboarding, and it was only like one run, and the snow wasn't great, but it was like we could say that we went and snowboarded on November 22nd. And I grew up in Montana, and I'd always go like Thanksgiving Day is most likely. I've never skied. Nothing's ever opened before Thanksgiving. And so here in North Dakota, I want to be part of history. So we went there. And so Andrew wanted to come along. And Andrew, I always skeptical because like we've had a couple incidences with Andrew and bringing him along to go snowboarding. And love the kid. He's an amazing kid, hilariously funny and gifted kid. And he's one of our relatives, so we have to love him. And, oh, did I say that out loud? I'm just kidding. And so we brought him on, because my flashback every time when I hear, hey, can Andrew come? And I'm like, because I go back to the first time we took him snowboarding, and we're all in the car, we're piled in there. I think it was for Corbin's birthday. We're all piled in, and I'm doing the checklist with all the kids. Okay, everybody have a coat, check. Gloves, check. Hat, check. Goggles, check. Snowboards, gear. We're going through the checklist, and I'm like, you guys have all this stuff? And they're all like, yes, drive. And we go down the road, and we're 10 miles away from Huff Hills. And lo and behold, I hear from the back, hey, does anybody have a coat I could borrow? It was Andrew saying he forgot his coat. And so the second time we took him, we joked about it, we remembered it, and we said, hey, okay, everybody got everything. Went through the checklist again, we joked, you got a coat? Yeah, I got my coat. And this time it's about 30 miles away, I hear from the back, hey, does anybody have an extra gloves I can borrow? He'd forgotten his gloves. And so this time we got in the car, and I was so proud of him because he's been more than ready. He's actually got a snowboard. He got it ready to go. He's excited, and I'm going through the checklist, and I did it twice. I checked it twice. I said, are we good? We got hats. And he's like holding things up, and we're like making sure we're checking things off the list, and he was prepared this time. And you know what? We had an amazing time, and he wasn't cold, and in fact, he had everything he needed to snowboard. And we had a great time. There was no panic. There was no like, oh, everyone's giving them his sweaters that first time, and people are trying to find gloves, and it was a process. But this time he was prepared because he was planned out ahead of time. And even though he might have had some failures in the past, he was planned out for this trip. I was proud of him, and it made the trip a lot better because he was prepared. But friends, there's so many Christians that I believe that are not prepared for what's coming. Trust me, as God laid this passage on my heart, I pray about where does God want to take us next. You know, we went to the book of Colossians, and we were in the Sermon on the Mount, and we kind of built, and then he's sharing with me Daniel, and I'm like, really? You want to double check that? One of the things that he laid on my heart, the Lord laid on my heart, is that we as Christians need to be prepared for what's coming. 2,000 years ago, when some of the New Testament was written, they said that, hey, the Lord is coming back soon. The end is coming. And that was 2,000 years ago, so you better believe it's coming quicker. And it's here. And are we ready? Have we prepared ourselves? And I think a lot of times we wing it, and we sit in church, and I can give you the checklist, and I can say, hey, you guys ready? You got your love on for the Lord? You're dealing with this? You're ready for this? And we kind of check it off, and we're like, oh, and then when it's going to come to the heat of the moment, being a pastor and be responsible to preach the Word of God is a huge, huge thing. I don't take it lightly. And are we going to really be ready? We're going to have our hats and our gloves, and when we're ready to go in those moments, when the heat comes, are we going to be ready? And I think we can learn a lot from the book of Daniel. It's kind of his journey from being a boy to growing old, and it's kind of his diary that he wrote of his life, and it's a very huge inspiration. And so the book of Daniel is the most disputed book in the Bible in terms of authorship and the writing of it, because there are basically two sections and kind of two parts to this book as we've been looking at. The first part we're very familiar with. In fact, we've been hearing these stories since we were in Sunday school, a lot of you. And these are the great stories of the Bible, right? You know, who's heard of Daniel in the lion's den? Anybody? Two of you? Okay, good. What about, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or for you VeggieTales lovers, Rack, Shack, and Benny? and the fiery furnace and King Nebuchadnezzar and all these great stories, these great people. And so the first 6 chapters are immersed with these amazing stories that we've grown up with about Daniel's faith and his friend's faith, right? But in the last part of it, we skip in Sunday school because the last part of the 7 through 12 chapters, they even make a bunch of the scholars itch their head. And in fact, because it's about dreams and interpretations, and Daniel starts talking about things that was prophecy in his day, we're kind of at the crux of it where we can read this journal, but you have to understand when we look back, we're looking at his history. A lot of the stuff that he predicted is history, but for him, it was prophecy. It hadn't happened yet. And so that's why everybody debates that this book actually happened, because he predicted the rise and the fall of every major superpower to the day. And he's right on. And there's stuff that we can also in this book look forward to, as he has looked forward to, that's not yet come, called prophecy. So we have to deal with all that. From these amazing stories of faith to prophetic word till the end of when Christ is returning and coming. Now, I want you to understand a couple things before we get into this book, okay? This deals with the end times, and so there's kind of 2 books in the Bible that people kind of gravitate towards when they're thinking about prophetic things that are about to come. Obviously, Revelation is a big one, right? We all heard of Revelation. Some of you guys have tried to get through that, and there's beasts, and there's living creatures, and there's lots of crazy stuff, and you don't understand it, and it's awesome book, right? And that's about the end times, the things that are coming, what John saw and wrote about. But then there's a book of Daniel, where the prophet Daniel also prophesied these things as well. But you have to understand there's a big distinction between these books. Number one is that you have to look at who they were written to. The book of Revelation is written to a Jewish audience. Right? God's chosen people, it's always been about the Jews, and it always will be about the Jews to the very end. It's his chosen people. It's their story. It's that story, okay? And we as Gentiles, if you're not of Jewish descent, we have Gentiles, us Gentile Germans here in North Dakota, we are engrafted into that plan. So we're part of that plan, but it's for a Jewish audience. It's about God's chosen people. So Revelation is a Jewish audience, but I want you to look at Daniel in terms of Daniel is actually a Gentile book. And so it's very helpful for us to see how we fit into this overall picture. And so I want us to kind of keep that in mind as we study this book and these 2 kind of parts that we're gonna dive into. So we started this book, and we're in verse 6, and I'd like you to stand together as we dive in a little bit more. I'm going to repeat the verse 6. Let's stand together as we read God's word. And this is a verse that we left with last week, but we're going to start with it again. Among these were Daniel. Remember we picked up that God delivered Israel into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar, or Judah into King Nebuchadnezzar, was taken into they weren't taken into captivity yet till 586, but these guys, there's some people that were a part of the nobility. We'll look at these guys that Nebuchadnezzar took in exile with them. And among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them the names. These are Babylonian names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Now it's funny that you guys may be seated. It's funny that in the church that we always go Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those are Babylonian names, and we forget the Hebrew names. But these dudes were the best of the best. And last week, you've got to get out of your mind that these guys were old. They were not. None of these guys could even grow a beard. Maybe just a little facial hair if they got into the sun and you could see it on the reflection. These guys were young. They estimate that these guys were between the ages of 13 and maybe up to 17, but probably not. These were boys. These were kids. These are kids in our youth group. These were kids that were in noble homes and families of royalty, that were destined to do great things. These were boys that were raised in the Jewish traditions, the Jewish law of God. Most likely, like every good Jewish boy, they memorized the first couple books of the Old Testament. These boys were learned, and they were the best of the best. And the scripture says that they were godly, they were educated, and they were great families, and they were good looking. Ladies, they were good looking. They were dreamy. They're so dreamy. Right? I mean, on Facebook, they had thousands of friends. they could have any girl in Israel. They had a life that was destined. And last week we saw that God gave them over to King Nebuchadnezzar. That it wasn't King Nebuchadnezzar's not the main player in this story. It's God. And he handed them into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar. And these boys that had everything going for them, we looked at this last week, that everything going for them, in a moment, they lost everything. They lost their family and their friends and their homes. They even lost their names. Most likely when they were taken, they probably never saw their parents or their family again. Think about it. As Josephus, the ancient writer, made the case last week, that they were most likely castrated as well. They lost their masculinity. They were probably eunuchs. Imagine. They lost everything. And the thing that will blow you away about this first chapter is there's not a hint of bitterness. In Daniel's writings, there's not a hint of bitterness against the Lord. And in fact, they didn't lose their souls, and they didn't lose sight of God's plan, because they'd done something previous to this captivity that we're looking at tonight. They were to spend 3 years in the kingdom of Babylon, in the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, under royal education. And in fact, Nebuchadnezzar had a plan to take all the best of the world, the nations that he was conquering, take the cream of the crop, bring them to Babylon, and educate them for 3 years in Babylonian ways to show off to the world, because he understood that to be a superpower and to maintain a superpower, you not only had to conquer these other nations, but you also had to rule those other nations. And so he was bringing them and schooling them and basically brainwashing them for 3 years. Part of their education was literature and writing and mathematics, but it was also about mystery and there was also deviation and occultic things of the Babylonian gods. He was trying to brainwash them. They were trained in trying to interpret dreams and mind reading and dealing with satanic things of pagan gods that he wanted to expose them to. It was an evil place. He was going to brainwash them. And in fact, ancient Babylon, if you look at ancient Babylon, was a magnificent place. It's about 50 miles south of Baghdad. But during that time, it was the superpower. It was the hub of the world. And in fact, all the other major superpowers that came, whether it was Greeks, whether it was the Romans, they all took a lot. It was the birthplace of literature, of writing. They spoke Aramaic, which most of the Old Testament was. In the language of the Chaldeans, is what they would say. They had these beautiful hanging gardens that they would have that are still considered the seventh wonder of the ancient world. They were massive cities with massive riches and massive gold. And in fact, we looked last week where they took some of the gold of the temple of God and put it into their temples and their gods, multiple gods that they would worship. Revelation says that this city was such an impacting thing on planet Earth, the nation of Babylon, and that even in Revelation, the new Babylon is going to be coming and raising up. It's a great city. It's an evil city. Even further roots, if you remember a story called the Tower of Babel earlier, that's where it happened too. There's great things that happen in the city. And these boys were brought there. But they were brought there to be brainwashed. And they lost everything. And in fact, they lost their names. The name Daniel, they changed to Belshazzar. And Daniel, the name of Daniel, he was given. Can you imagine like when his parents, and there's not a lot of emotion in the first parts of this book, but if you just put yourself in their shoes, there's a ton of emotion. Can you imagine the parents of Daniel seeing their son taken into captivity with this wicked king? And a mom who's remembering this baby boy, Daniel. Remember they got together and they named him Daniel, which means God is my judge. And he loses his name to Belshazzar, which means Prince of Bel, the pagan, wicked, satanic god of Babylon. Hananiah, his dad was so proud of him and gave him the name that God, who is gracious, he gave me a boy. Hananiah. That wicked king turned it into Shadrach, which means command of the moon god. A pagan, satanic god. Mishael. Oh, his grandpa's proud of him. Such a good boy. Fits his name. His name is who is like God. Such a good boy. They changed it to Meshach, who is like Aku, the Babylonian god. Azariah. Oh, he was always helping out. Azariah, he would do anything. He would see those people that just needed an extra hand, or the person that was down and out, and because his name was God has helped. And they changed his name to Abednego, the servant of the god Nergal, a pagan, satanic god that they would worship. They lost everything. They went from holy roots, men of God, boys of God, young men of God, to a pagan life, to be schooled in the things of Satan, things of pride and lust, and the things of the world that was epitomized in King Nebuchadnezzar in the country of Babylon. But let's jump into the first encounter. Stand together and let's read Daniel chapter 1, verses 8. It says this, but Daniel. I always love it when they say but. Take notice, circle it, or even say however, or then. Those words, you always got to take note of. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, nor with the wine that he drank. Before he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Verse 11. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let us the appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youth who ate of the king's food. So the stewards took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them all vegetables. You may be seated. That's amazing. Being part of the king's educational system, they got the food. And Daniel didn't hesitate. Have you ever hesitated, like when you've tried to order something? Have you ever gone through a drive-through? And when you're with kids, parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the total anxiety when you get through the drive-through. You totally lock up. Has anybody ever been there? Like you get in there and it's total stress. It's complete stress because you get up there and everybody's shouting orders and you got this speaker like, and that's what the sound's like. You can't even hear them. You got kids in the back yelling orders, and I just freak out. I got panic. I got anxiety. I have to take some like meds before I go through a drive-through. Ask my kids. It's the truth. And you get in there and you start ordering because I kind of lock up. It's not like I hear from the back, give me a number one, and they always forget their drink, and then I have to relay it back. What kind of drink and what kind of this? And then once you get it all ordered and printed out, then you hear from the back the substitutions. That should have happened earlier, but they never did because they weren't there and they didn't see the board, and then they're all thinking about these little, and they advertise you with you pictures, and all of a sudden they see a picture like, that smoothie looks great. Can I change that smoothie? And they just start doing substitutes, and then you got to substitute pot for a smoothie, and you got to do this, and then like, we don't want, we want a cheeseburger, but plain. Okay, was that plain? You got to make sure that it's plain, and you go back and forth. You're the middle guy. You're totally stressed out, and then you hear things like this, like, Dad, I wanted a hamburger, but hey, can they substitute that for a fish instead? And you're like, what? Okay, and then, hey, is that sesame seeds on the top of the bun? Can they scrape that off? You know, it's like this whole thing, right? The cars are honking, and then there's more people, and you see out of the corner of your eye, they're all lined up, and you know they're just disgusted. They're like, going on? That's a minivan up there, you know? And they're all freaking out. They're honking. You're sweating. And the lady on the mic starts freaking out because you're changing everything. And then it's disaster, right? Because you're not prepared. My kids know better now. They know if, like, I give them the heads up, like 8 miles away from McDonald's, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking about going to McDonald's, everybody. Please, exactly what you want to order. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it because they're prepared. Because they know that when we get up there, there's not going to be any hassle. It's going to be all good. And we get up there, and I start with the youngest to the oldest, and we just go up the line, and we order, and it's a smooth process. Except when they forget, like, ketchup and straws when you've already driven away. Then it's chaos. We keep extras in the glove box because we planned ahead. Have you ever gone to a donut shop? Like a donut counter, and you just freak out. Like, there's so many choices, and you go up there and you're just like, okay. And then it challenges your math skills. Like, you're on the fly. I always get panicked. Maybe it's just me. Anybody else do this? But you get up there and you're just like looking at all this. Okay, we'll take like 2 of those cream-filled things, and then I'll take like 1 bear claw, and you start pointing that out, and it's just like, well, now you have 9 more. You're like, okay, 9 more, and you're kind of doing the math, and you're going, okay, wow, I'm going to take 2 sprinkles. 9 minus that, 2, it's the 7. I got 7. Okay, I'm good. I'm doing the math. And you end up just hyperventilating and freaking out, and there's too many choices, there's too many things going on, and then the kid's like, I want this one, and you end up with like 7 nasty maple bars. You know what I mean? You end up just freaking out and ordering something that nobody eats. Or something with nuts on it. And I don't want nuts, and I don't want sprinkles. And it's like you always mess up. You can't ever do right, you know? And that's why I love these yogurt shops that are out there. Have you been to these yogurt shops? Because they let you sample to make a decision before you commit. They have the little cups, you know? We should go to Tutti Frutti. They're closed in Jamestown, but they still got them. And you get to sample them, and you can make a whole meal out of those little samples. But before you commit, I love that. Then you can make a decision and go through the line. But there's not all those places that have that privilege. But you kind of get up in there in the moment when you're ordering and something takes over and you just kind of panic a little bit. There's too many choices. There's things going on. And I should have made this decision. I was recently at a gelato shop. And I love gelato. And it's unbelievable. For you Germans that not discovered gelato, please discover it. The Italians had something going on down south. And it's amazing, rich ice cream. But there's so many choices, and it's so good, and they give you little teeny spoons and samples, and you're all kind of freaking out. And I was at this counter, and I was just locking up, and there's a whole long line. You could tell people are just disgusted, like, hurry up. And I don't know why these words came out, and I like pointed at the same time, and I'm like, just give me pistachio. Like, I live for chocolate. Like, there's nothing else, right? It's like anything chocolate. And for some reason, I'm pistachio, and I couldn't pull it back. And before I even recognize it, they're scooping it and throwing it in there, and you feel bad, and everyone's back there. So, man, I got this nasty pistachio. I walk away. It was like my one highlight, you know? It's like the one little time for me, you know? It's like, oh. And it was pistachio, which tasted somewhat like fish sticks and banana pudding together. Disgusting. Why do I say all this? It's because it's not just when we order food. It's kind of like that's what happens in life. And I'm telling you, you don't know what's coming tomorrow morning. You don't know what's coming on Tuesday, and you don't know what's coming Wednesday. You may know who's coming over on Thursday, but you don't know what's going to happen on Thursday. All the scenarios that could possibly happen, how do you know? How do you know? How are you going to be tested? You may be coming up to a counter and God has some choices in there and you're like, whoa, I'm not prepared for this at all. And friends, this is how we live our lives. This is how I struggle and this is how you struggle. And I'm just being honest. And this is why we're reading the book together. I'm right with you. We kind of wing life when we get up there and like, okay, all right. And all these different things start coming out with these choices, and we start looking at this case and go, well, I don't like these choices, and you have to kind of live with this choice, and you don't like it, but you feel the pressure of everything like that. But that's not how Daniel lived. He made a decision before he even knew that he was going to be in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. He made a decision not to defile himself with unclean food. He made a decision. He made up his mind beforehand. Now, friends, you got to understand, what did that decision mean? He's not an idiot. He's handsome, but he's not dumb. He had the two things going on. A lot of times those handsome boys are like a box of rocks up there. But he had them both going on. It meant death. If you came against the king and said, as he places food before you, the king's court, and you go, no, I'm not eating that. And in fact, even the steward that was overseeing this whole process for King Nebuchadnezzar, he said, are you kidding me? That's my neck. King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't play games. He doesn't play around. He gets what he wants. Otherwise, you're dead. But he made a decision. And so my problem is, why didn't Daniel just eat the food? Come on. It's the king's food. It's probably really good. All right, it's probably eating like a Burger King. Come on. I mean, was he was one of those guys that only eats organic? And I know the king uses pesticides. I've seen those fields. Right? Was he just kind of an organic? Was he like, I only do gluten-free? I mean, was he kind of have this special diet? Was he a health food nut? Was he just a vegetarian? You know, I don't understand vegetarians. I'm a carnivore myself. Vegetarian, I don't know. Why did he make this choice? But he made this choice before it was even a problem. And he made this choice for two reasons. Number one is that in Jewish law, you couldn't eat food, two kinds of food. Food that was sacrificed to idols and food that was unclean. There are certain animals, like bacon, pigs, that were unclean. I love how the Old Testament, some of those laws, people are like, what are you talking about? Well, some of those Old Testament laws were because of hygiene and things that they didn't have a clue about yet. Science hadn't caught up, and God was protecting them in the midst of how they prepared food and how they lived. And so, as a boy, Daniel grew up, and he made a decision for Christ. Maybe it was at camp. He made that choice. I don't know. Maybe it was at a Sunday night service at Streeter. He made a decision that he was going to follow God with his whole heart. But he made a choice. And he knew that he was not going to waver from that choice. And he says that Daniel resolved in himself not to eat the king's food, because that food was sacrificed to all the gods and the pagan gods of Babylon, and that food, there was a lot that was unclean. He's like, I'm not compromising. And whatever the consequences are there, I'm going to have to live with. Because he knew by saying that there were going to be consequences. But he was smart. Remember, he was handsome and smart, not handsome and dumb. He was handsome and smart, and he knew that, hey, I'm going to have a dialogue. And so he has this dialogue, and God allows him to have a plan ahead of time. And so he gives him this plan, shows him favor. He doesn't just say, no, I'm not going to eat this food, but he goes, God, help me. Do you see that? He didn't just say, okay, I'm going to live this way. And this is the thing, is we live in our world where we have to make a stand for a lot of things. But it's not just, I'm going to make this stand and bury myself, is God can help navigate us through this. He's there for us. He's active. If you make the decision and the plan, he will follow through. He'll help you. And so he comes up with this plan, and he says, just give me 10 days, all right? King Nebuchadnezzar, he's probably out conquering something. We got 10 days to burn here. It's not going to make a huge difference. Give me 10 days. And they come up with this plan. God shows them favor. And the guy that's in charge is saying, it's my neck here. I'll give you 10 days. It seems reasonable. They negotiate this out. And he has an active plan. And he's going to put God to the test. And it's a huge risk. He says, I'll prove it. And at the end of the day, God came through. Man, 10 days of eating veggies, and they look awesome. I love it. It says that they were fattier. Fat is cool, Daniel. And they look better after 10 days. God always honors doing the right thing, even if it means that you have to sacrifice something in the short term. He will always honor it in the long term. Doing the right thing isn't popular. Can you imagine the other students, okay? Think about this at your school lunches, kids. Somebody comes in and they say, hey, principal, me and my 3 buddies, we ain't going to eat this food. No, all we want is Brussels sprouts and broccoli. Yep, that's all we want, and water. That's it. I think that the kids would think better and be better. And so the principal's like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, we'll do that. And so for 10 days, all you get is that. And even your parents buy into this at home. So for 10 days, you don't get Lucky Charms. You don't get Pop-Tarts in the morning. You don't get any of that. And at night, you don't get any kind of meat. You just get veggies, all right? And so then at the end of 10 days, the principal looks at you get all the kids like, wow, you guys are healthier. You look better. You guys are winning more ball games. The coaches are digging on it. And so what do? And the parents are like, my kids are different kids. They pay attention. They're not just like, woohoo, all over the place, hyped up on sugar. And they're really good. And everybody buys into this plan. So how would those kids treat those 4 kids at school? Think about it. I mean, Daniel and these 3 dudes just got rid of all the king's pizza. They traded for broccoli, donuts. They got tofu. You know, the best wine. They got tomato juice. I mean, they had the best of the king's food. And now they have to eat vegetables. They're vegetarians now. Great. Thanks, Daniel. Your 3 friends. But God honored it. But the main key is that Daniel made a decision before it all happened. Because when you have to make decisions in the moment, I'm telling you what, Satan will come at you with all barrels. And he'll bring his friends. And that's why we fall into sin and temptations and all these things, is because we haven't determined ahead of time the plan. We come up to life in this counter with all these choices, and it comes at us like crazy. I close with this story. I was at the ski area, and the guys were getting their stuff ready, and I was going to go buy the lift tickets and get stuff, and I was going to get some passes, and they had a family deal, and I could get like discounted passes. And I asked him, is that like the immediate family, or is that like, extended family? Because we had another Erbele with us. Granted, he's a redhead, but every family needs a ginger. I love him. And so I'm in my mind going, oh man, he's older than Corbin. I was in that moment, I'm like wrestling myself going, I'm just going to adopt him for a few hours. He comes with us all the time anyways. Let's just add him. Add him to the roster. I mean, come on, look at how many people are here. They're not going to miss a little extra cash. He's a relative. I mean, we got Erbele blood in us. It's legit. And I started processing this, and Satan came alongside me and his little friends, and they're like gathering around, and even Lauren and I are kind of looking at each other, and she was there, and she's like, oh, wow. And we're just kind of struggling at that moment. I'm just like, he's older than Corbin, that would fit right there. We could just go right down the line, and on my three kids will just turn into 4, Maybe his parents will let me write him off of my taxes. I don't know. We'll just see once. And then you got contemplate. I mean, this is just a poor high school kid. He's just trying to, have some snowboarding fun. I mean, he farms sheep for Pete's sakes, and you kind of go through there and contemplating, should I or shouldn't I? And see, the mistake I made is that I didn't make up my mind ahead of time. And so it was this battle that should have never even been a battle. And in fact, after I processed it, I'm like, no, sorry. 3 children is enough. We gambled the girl and one with Lauren, so that's enough. And the reality is I did the right thing. But I started reflecting on that, and it's like, that shouldn't even have been a battle. And I was really, really glad when later on I went up there and the lady remembered me from bringing a bunch of youth kids to the ski retreat. And I could have blown my testimony. And you know what? And we'll probably bring a bunch more youth kids there. And I made the right decision. But the mistake that I did make is that I did not make the decision ahead of time to live it out. So things become battles for us when they shouldn't be. Temptations become temptations because we come up to the counter. Whether it's temptations or even our own self-worth or even depression, we come up to that table. And, how do I feel about myself today? Or negative thoughts. What's being served at you? Whatever you're facing, it's like coming up to that counter or driving to the drive-thru with the whole menu that you're going to be served. And friends, before you get there, Monday is coming. And before you get to Monday, right now, you have to resolve, like Daniel did, what you're going to do and who you're going to be. Before Satan comes at you and says you're worthless, resolve who you are in Christ, that you're a child of the one true King. Before pornography comes and tempts you, you resolve that you're not going to look at it and influence your heart and your mind. Before you're tempted to walk away from your marriage, you have to resolve long before there's problems that you're not going to walk away. When you may have an urge to be angry and to lash out at another person, you have to resolve long before that that's not how you're going to handle it when you feel those feelings, when you come up to the counter. Integrity doesn't happen in the moment. It happens long before it. The decisions are already made. And Daniel got it. And we all need to get it. Because, friends, I believe what's going to be served in front of the counter, there's still some pretty good choices that you can have. But I'm telling you what is coming at us, we may have to make the choice that Daniel did. It might be life and death. It might not. But to do the right thing, I believe that God will honor it every time. You may not feel it in that moment. You really want a double chocolate gelato. God always gives us what we need, not what we want. And God will give to Daniel and his friends, as we're going to see, what they need and not necessarily what they want. But we make the choices now. before we even get into this book, I've kind of prefaced this the last 2 weeks, is that the decision happens tonight. A lot of times when we get into a book and we start going, oh, and God works on our hearts as we kind of go through that. But this is one of those books where you have to come right now and make a decision. No compromise. Let's pray.